Welcome to Political Misfits, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Michelle Witte. I am here with John Kiriakou. Howdy, John. We have our first guest on the line. We're going to talk a little bit about what Kamala Harris had to say about her economic plans for the United States in her interview with MSNBC. Joining us for this conversation is Steve Grumbine. He's a founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. He hosts the podcast Macro and Cheese, and he is, of course, a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So the way this interview is being promoted also is sort of funny to me. So on Wednesday, Kamala Harris, the Democratic candidate for president, the vice president, sat down with Stephanie Ruhle of MSNBC for what is being described as her first solo network interview as a candidate, which feels on one hand the weirdly like, you know, when they talked about Joe Biden taking big boy questions or something, like it was all by yourself without any training wheels. But also it also feels like MSNBC is sort of reaching for a first here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of qualifications there. First, solo, network, whatever. So that aside, it was mostly about economic issues. And in an early question, Ruhle says, boy, people sure do prefer Donald Trump on the economy, even though over the last 4 years, there have been tremendous economic wins. And I heard that and thought I would like a citation there. I'd like to be directed to evidence of some of these economic wins. And then I thought, well, hold on, Michelle. For one example, there are more billionaires than there have ever been before as of 2024, and they are richer than they've ever been. Forbes, in its annual billionaires list, noted that there were in 2024 121 more billionaires than in 2023 and 26 more than the record set in 2021. So take that, Donald Trump. Ford also wrote that much of the gains come from the top 20, who added a combined $700 billion worth in wealth since 2023. Also, much of the gains come from the United States, which now boasts a record 813 billionaires worth a combined $5.7 trillion. I won't belabor the point anymore. That's just what came to mind when Ruhle mentioned the tremendous economic wins of the Biden administration. And I wondered if you could come up with anything else that Kamala Harris has to sell as an economic victory that people should appreciate over the accomplishments of Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, let me just say this. There's a couple things that I think are somewhat important. Number one, you know, I'm on record as not being a champion of this administration. So let's just get that out of the way. So anything I say after this is begrudging, but it's true. So, you know, the Inflation Reduction Act, as much as I wasn't a fan of it, the one thing it did do, they brought home some production, right? We haven't manufactured much in this country in a long time. And taking the opportunity to bring manufacturing home, even for chips and things like that, you know, there's people that are celebrating that, and there are people that, you know, I have some respect for. So it's not a zero sum. That said, let me just be crystal clear. The thing that they need to be bragging on right now, because they're not winning the working class vote. The working class vote is going to them. And they've lost the Muslim vote because they're genocidal maniacs. And that kind of leaves them with just rich people. So if they're going to preach to the rich and preach to their Republicans like Dick Cheney that they've wooed into their tent, they need to be celebrating the fact that the Fed hiked interest rates up and made those extra billionaires. Because what have I said every time I've been on the show? Those interest rate hikes were free money, a basic income for the rich. And this was ultimately how many, many, many people that were holding bonds and stocks and other things were, you know, interest rate hikes are a gift to those who already have money. So if Kamala is going to be celebrating and selling a good economy, she should be speaking to those who she serves, and that's the rich. Working class people, you know, I want to be crystal clear. Many people desperate to find work still. The kind of work that's commensurate with the massive student loans that are about to crack down this week. Okay. We have a major amount of money that is going to suddenly be hitting people, and it's going to have negative effects on their credit rating. It's going to have negative effects on their ability to survive. Mm-hmm. And the turning back on of student loans is going to be another economic achievement that Kamala can run on, instead of delaying or punting, or instead of using the debt collective's executive order that they could have used that would have gotten rid of any of the potential for the right-wing attacks in court. Had they really wanted to. They knew that this would happen. And so, they should run, this is what they did. They should celebrate the fact that student loans are turning back on and going to destroy tons and tons of working class people and their families. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of sales pitch they should be selling.
Honestly, your public pitch should probably be the true one. I think it is interesting that publicly, the conversation is all about the middle class and the working class. It's privately that Kamala Harris is meeting with Wall Street bankers and the heads of cryptocurrencies, holding meetings in her home and in the White House or the vice president's office, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, the bottom line is this administration has been anything but friendly to working class Americans. It feels terrible because obviously there's nothing about Donald Trump that is appealing to people with a brain. I mean, the guy he says the dumbest stuff, right? So I don't even take it very seriously. But when you think about the fact that we have been sold, as long as I've been alive, the cultural hegemony is that, Democrats are good guys. They're the good guys. This is the narrative that we're sold. They're the ones that stand for the working class. Don't you know? Don't you know?
Yeah.
And so we have been inundated with this thing. Now, I don't want this to come off as the Republicans are the good guys. What it is they do the exact same stuff, from immigration and building walls, which I guess you could call that another potential economic achievement. But they're literally vilifying immigrants. They're literally making Palestinians and other Muslims non-people. So their economic achievements are through funding genocide. That's certainly something she should celebrate. Given who she is and what she stands for and how smug she's been about the genocide. And then you've got the Vote Blue sycophants out there who literally, when you talk about genocide with them and the funding of it, they laugh at you like you don't know what you're talking about. And it's just part of the cult of the Vote Blue sycophant that blinds them to this stuff. But ultimately, the economic achievements, in my mind, you can almost all point to the very, very, very backwards, very regressive interest rate hikes that flooded the economy, and the rich in particular, with more money, gave them lots and lots and lots of money. And I guess they're waiting for trickle down to come through, more supply side economics, Reagan style. Mm-hmm. So, I guess that's her calling card at this point.
Yeah. And, Steve, we are always happy to be, I am happy to be fair and talk about the actual accomplishments of this administration for, middle class and working class people. It just seems like, again, we can see who's benefited.
Yep.
And it's not as though, as we say, that Republicans would be any better. Although, in the extremely sort of short term and a limited scope, Trump's individual tax cuts did benefit a lot of low income workers, households headed by someone without a college degree. Listen, that's not the kind of change that is going to change the trajectory of this country. But people know that. People know you're going to have maybe $500 extra at the end of the year if that's happening. The other question I had in paying more lip service to the middle class, Kamala Harris, in defending some of her economic proposals, said, when you grow the middle class, America's economy is stronger, which I can certainly buy. I just wonder, since the U.S. middle class has been shrinking steadily since 1971, dropping from 61% of households in this country that year to 51% of households in 2023, according to Pew. I just wonder if this has been the trend for the last 45 years, why is Kamala Harris just proposing a bunch of garbage that we've already heard? The share of U.S. household income held by the U.S. middle class has fallen almost without fail every decade since 1970. In that year, middle-income households accounted for 62% of aggregate income of all U.S. households, about the same share as people who lived in middle-class households. So 61% of the population is middle class, and they have 61% of the wealth. That sounds about right. By 2022, the middle class share in overall household income had dropped 20% to 43%, less than the share of the population. So we have a smaller share of people in the middle class, and their incomes are also smaller. And I do think we're sort of overestimating the middle class here, because according to a Washington Post survey from earlier this year, Americans have, they agree on what it means to be middle class. And that includes having a secure job, being able to save money, being able to afford an emergency $1,000 expense without going into debt, being able to pay your bills on time, having health insurance, and being able to retire comfortably. Those were in the top 5 or 6. And according to the Post, only about a third of American households can actually achieve that. Part of the reason is probably due to things like rent inflation, which according to Doorloop has outpaced currency inflation by more than 40%. I forgot to put in the period of time there, but I think it's the past decade. So again, this is not, we're talking about a trend of decades. Mm-hmm. There have been Republican administrations. There have been Democratic administrations. I'm not laying this necessarily on the feet of one party, but I am saying if you actually intended to reverse this at all, you wouldn't be proposing exactly the same things Joe Biden has proposed, but actually watered down a little more. So are any of the ways Harris says she's investing in the middle class going to work?
No, even mild help at this point would be great. But the reality is that the average American doesn't have a clue about economics. Mm-hmm. Okay. The average American, the average pundit, no offense to you guys in your wonderful profession, has very little understanding of economics. Mm-hmm. The political class, those running for office, have very little understanding of economics. So when Kamala goes up there with focused group tested slogans and whatnot, you're counting on that ignorance to reign supreme. The average person doesn't ask questions. They're here to cheer for the Yankees or the Orioles. They're here to cheer for the blue team or the red team. They're here to cheer for Democrats or Republicans. And, anything that goes wrong is the other team's fault. But they both are literally championing the same nonsense. Yeah. And really, at the end of the day, as there are rhetorical differences, but the outcomes are largely the same. Mm-hmm. And, I'm just going to gently push back on this concept of the middle class, because I prefer to look at this more as the working class. And when I think of the working class as a whole, the working class doesn't stick together because they've been subdivided into all these micro classes, the middle class, the poor, the this, the that. So naturally, if you're middle class, you're going to be clutching your pearls to not let go of anything you've gained. It doesn't matter if you're going to have to walk over dead bodies to keep that. You're going to keep doing that. Now, the good news, if you follow what I talk about with economics, is that it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. The government, the federal government, could be taking care of these issues. It could issue things like price controls, rent control. It could do a number of things that maintain the living standards for regular people. But you're not going to hear that because they have an ideological proclivity and an affinity for libertarian Austrian logic, for the kind of, conflation, the fascism that they preach, this kind of combination of church and state, if you will. The idea here of the government literally yielding to the private sector, and the private sector's dictating the terms. And what does the private sector have to rein in? They have nothing. They have one goal and one goal only, and every MBA student that ever got a degree knows it, and that is maximize shareholder value. In fact, there's laws in the books that if they realize a company is not maximizing shareholder value, that the actual shareholders can come after them for being good stewards of the company. They could lose their jobs. So at the end of the day, what you see right now is Reaganomics. They're praising the entrepreneur, the big entrepreneur. Government itself creates so much. People don't realize that. Government created the internet through the defense contracts. Government has created so many aspects of society that have been given over, publicly funded initiatives given over to the private sector to capitalize on. And then we're left paying for that, not in taxes, because taxes don't fund spending, but in terms of having to buy things that could have been publicly available to us. Mm-hmm. So this whole Kamala's entire program, you could see her and Ronald Reagan spooning in like 1980 with their economic plans.
Yeah.
And that's just not interesting to me. That's not good. That's not good governance.
I'll add something too. Like you, I'm educated. I have, a couple of degrees. I've worked a long career. I grew up in a middle class household. Mm-hmm. I don't consider myself to be middle class anymore. Mm-hmm. I consider myself to be working class because I live paycheck to paycheck, like many Americans do. I rent because I can't afford to buy. I'll probably never be able to afford to buy. Mm-hmm. And I've come to the difficult realization that I'm probably going to have to work until the day I die.
Yeah, you can scratch afford to retire comfortably really off a lot for a lot of people who might, be able to make all the rest of the list. Yeah, no, it's really hard.
It is.
Like, it's astonishing to me. I agree. It is silly to, like, if you're working for a living, you are all in the same. We are all in the same boat.
Yes.
Whether you are working to make $20 an hour or you are working to make $50 an hour, because there is a really big actually range of incomes that at this point that will not get you security.
That's right.
And a lot of that is because of home prices.
You know what? In my own personal case, most of it is because of home prices.
Yeah, because it's so much harder to just get that one valuable asset.
That's right.
That then, gives you the freedom to, swap it for other assets, whatever. Mm-hmm. It gives you the freedom to take on some debt that can be useful, all of that other stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
And that sort of takes us to the next question, right? Which is, a little less general. But really, I did want to point out, like, this is just a sort of bipartisan death spiral that we are in. For anybody in the United States who is not, realistically looking at being a multimillionaire or a billionaire. That's just the direction we're going, and no one is proposing anything different. Mm-hmm. But to move on to some sort of wonky home stuff, I wanted to talk about, the big news, which is this huge storm that has hit the Southeast. Helene, we gave a bit of an overview of it at the top of the show, but one of the things that caught my ear on one of the morning news podcasts, it was NPR. They were talking to a man from Florida who was described as having bought his dream house a year ago and gave this interview after he had evacuated. He had sandbagged it up. He'd put his electronics up on high shelves and left. And in this interview, he said, I can't afford anything but like basic liability insurance.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back. I'm expecting to take a lot of losses, but he said it is cheaper to just buy more stuff than have insurance. Realtor magazine earlier this year reported that the average home insurance rate is about $2,300 annually, but across the country, homeowners are expecting to see a 6% uptick in premiums, and that's on top of a 20% increase over the last 2 years. There still could be double-digit percentage rises in places like Florida, Louisiana, and Oklahoma, where various natural disasters are regular. And according to this report in CBS, affordable housing providers in particular are looking at higher insurance premiums. Nearly 1 in 3 experienced rate increases of at least 25% in the most recent coverage renewal period. This is according to a letter that was signed by a bunch of housing organizations, low-income housing organizations, house building organizations, et cetera. And I'm of a couple different minds here. Like on one hand, every time you read about someone's home being wrecked by the kind of flood that occurs there every 7 years, you think, well, maybe that's a bad place to build a house. You know, maybe this is telling you something. But on the other hand, we are in this sort of perpetual housing crisis where you just don't have a lot of choice. And so I wonder, you know, where you think our sympathies should properly lie, and whether you can explain anything about why affordable housing insurance premiums would be rising faster than everybody else's.
Well, they can charge you, right? They can do whatever they want. They're private sector. They have no responsibility whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the problem with government having a laissez-faire approach to all of this. And when you think about this, you know, one of the proposals that I've seen recently brought up, which should be a no-brainer, is the government backing the insurance and providing government insurance. Just like FDIC, there should be homeowner insurance through the federal government. In fact, I think federal government should just insure homes in general. Because ultimately, you know, if you live anywhere and there is some form of natural disaster, what is preventing them from just going, okay, we're raising your premium?
Yeah.
The reality is I got a homeowner's insurance because of that disaster. I got homeowner's insurance because of these things. I shouldn't have to be hoping and praying I never have to use this thing I paid through the nose for to begin with. And then when you actually have to pay, you're going to take it out on me? Yeah. I don't think so. I think that's just horrible, but that's bad government. That business is going to do what business does. And why do they go after quote unquote low cost housing? Well, let's be fair. The government has subsidized that, so they know that they can go ahead and use this as a means of getting more money from the government, quite frankly, sucking it out of there. So
yes. I mean, sorry to interrupt you, Steve, but that's the point. When you start saying like, oh, we need help, people need help for their premiums, what ends up happening, this is what's happening with Medicare as well, is it just ends up being more public resources going to these private insurance companies, private health insurance, homeowners insurance, whatever, and not to people, right? So it just ends up being a mechanism by which you can reduce people's premiums, but that's just because your money is going now indirectly to those companies.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board with, you know, literally nationalizing and creating public options, and not just options. I want to get rid of the private sector personally, but since that's probably a pipe dream, I would at least like to see there be a government option here for insurance, because honestly, the government, once it gets in the game, it becomes the de facto price setter. So in other words, if government gives you a low cost insurance rate, everybody's going to go for the government insurance, and the private sector is going to have to meet or beat that to be able to be competitive. And I think that's a great way of controlling prices, by providing a public option that is lower than all the others. And if you want to stay in business, you meet or beat this. Just like a federal job guarantee could do the same thing for employment.
I have a question for you, too. This is something that Michelle and I have been talking about. Politico's reporting today, Steve, that Kamala Harris will have more trouble in Pennsylvania than people realize. And it's for an interesting reason, something that hasn't gotten a lot of play. Politico is saying that Pennsylvania has the second highest concentration of white Catholics anywhere in America, second only to Massachusetts. Those white Catholics in the northeastern part of the state have been solid Biden supporters, but really only for sentimental reasons, not for policy reasons. He said, or the article said, that they're generally anti-abortion, pro-gun, pro-union, conservative Democrats, like we used to have in the western part of Pennsylvania. Western Pennsylvania has become very Republican, of course, with the exception of Pittsburgh. But Politico argues that the demographics have changed and that these voters owe no loyalty to Kamala Harris. She's not Uncle Joe to anybody. How much of a problem do you think this is going to be for her? She's very slightly ahead in the polls in Pennsylvania right now, but not enough to claim outright that she's going to win the state. Do you think Donald Trump can successfully appeal to these voters and take Pennsylvania?
I think that Pennsylvania is very much a purple state, and very, very odd in its own makeup. I mean, you've got Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and the rest is Pennsylvania. And this is a state full of people that have their calendars set to hunting season. And it is an extremely conservative state.
Yep.
It is very conservative, far more conservative. And as a person that lives here, a fish out of water, I can tell you firsthand that people who are very kind, that you would think they're not the evil right wing, whatever. Even liberals are conservative out here. So it's a place that I think Kamala is hitting all the right conservative buttons. She's talking about, anti-immigrant. She's talking about building walls. She's talking about guns. And she was on a show with Oprah talking about somebody breaks in my house. I got a gun. I know where my gun is.
Right.
So she was saying that
she
whole,
did.
Sally got a gun kind of thing. And, I find it fascinating that any conservative wouldn't vote for Kamala because she is a Reagan Republican, even without she's more Republican than Trump is. So, based on our traditional understanding of what a Republican is, I don't know what you call Donald Trump other than just pure, carnival, heckler kind of guy. He's not really he doesn't really have an ideological proclivity. He's just, bombastic. I think he's more entertainment than he is ideological. Kamala is committed to neoliberalism, committed to supply side, committed to all the things that committed to genocide, committed to building the most lethal military in the world. She's carrying the water for ratcheting up hell with China. And she's, very much involved with carrying the water for ratcheting things up with, the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And she's willing to sacrifice every Ukrainian just to destabilize Russia. Mm-hmm. So, at the end of the day, I see nothing about her that should not be celebrated by Republicans because she is them. Yeah. They look in the mirror, they see Kamala.
I have to agree.
Yeah. Steve Grumbine, as always, we really appreciate your time. Tell our listeners where they can go to find more of your work.
Yes, please come to our Substack. We've moved away from a website. We're now on Substack, so it's Substack, Real Progressives. And also, please check out our podcast. Comes out every Saturday morning, 8 a.m., Macro and Cheese. And, if you check us out on Substack, you'll also notice that every Tuesday night we have a webinar for building community. And folks, if you want to learn about the economy, you want to understand class and how it all works together, our community webinars on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern time are a great place to get to hang out with us and hear the content.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great idea, building community. I like that, Steve. Thanks so much. Have a good weekend, Steve. Really appreciate it.
You too. Take care. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.